First, you can see the screen, everybody, and as you're muted, you can't say yes or no. Good afternoon, everybody. This is going to be about half an hour on Green CDA. The target is half an hour plus questions, and here is an outline of what we're going to be covering. Prashant, I trust you'll shout out if it can't be heard or if something goes wrong or whatever.
I can hear you, and so the other two people in this room.
Yeah, okay. So here is the outline of what I'm going to be covering. Firstly, an introductory couple of slides. What is Green CDA and how do you use it? That'll take a few minutes. Historical origins of Green CDA in HL7, a few minutes on that. But then we'll want to get on to the main meat of it, which is showing you an example of Green CDA. And the example I'm going to be using is the PHMR, the Personal Health Monitoring Record, which is part of the ITK CDA set. So then we have a first break for questions. I don't know whether there'll be 5 minutes worth of questions or not, but then you'll all be off mute and you can ask questions. Then into the second half, a couple of topics. A topic I was asked to look at or asked to discuss was comparing Green CDA with other CDA implementation techniques. So there's probably about 10 minutes on that. And then a brief outline of the current status of Green CDA in terms of what ITK CDAs are covered and how it's being used in the Information Sharing Challenge Fund. So after that, a second set of questions. And for those who are really keen, I've got some additional topics which are not really part of the main presentation. You can stay on after for 5 or 10 minutes to go into some of these additional topics or indeed to ask more about the main presentation. So that is the outline, and I will more or less go straight into it. So first part, what is Green CDA and how do you use it? This itself is a bit of a summary slide of stuff we're going to be covering over the rest of the talk. So basically, Green CDA is a name for a way of interfacing applications to standard CDA. And in this context, we're talking about standard UK ITK DHID style CDA. What Green CDA consists of is an intermediate XML, which is much simpler than full CDA. And so you can really look at that XML and understand it and so on and so forth. And so you have the intermediate XML and you have some supplied transforms which will reliably transform the intermediate green XML up to full CDA, which passes accreditation tests and so on and so forth, or which goes the other way. So you can use these Green CDAs either as a sender if you want to generate Green CDA and then convert it up to full CDA, or as a receiver if you want to receive full CDA and convert it down to Green CDA. But in either way, the idea is that what goes on the wire is full CDA and not Green CDA. Now, various Green CDAs have been developed. This always depends on what templates you're using for CDA, obviously. There's not just one Green CDA. There are and one Green CDA. There are different CDAs and different Green CDAs, and they depend on templates. So the question you want to know is, what templates have Green CDAs been developed for? So that's the what it is bit. The how do you use it bit, again, to summarize that in advance, how you use it is you interface your application simply to the simple Green XML, and that's a vanilla XML interfacing job. And then you use the supplied transforms to transform it up or down to full CDA. And that means you can build an interface to Green CDA and use the transforms to get the application accredited for full CDA. So what are the benefits of this? The main benefit is it shortcuts a lot of, in fact, most of the technical complexity of CDA, which, as you'll probably appreciate, is quite high. And it avoids a long CDA learning curve. So that's the introductory, what is it and how do you use it. A little more on what it is. The whole point of Green CDA is that it's an XML which is much simpler than standard CDA XML. And I won't illustrate this by full CDA documents, but here is just a small fragment of a full CDA. What you can see at the top half of the screen is one of the mandatory entries for the CDA header. That's the custodian, really the organization that owns this CDA. And as you can see, that is nested to a depth of about 3, and it's 10 lines of XML, and there's a lot of CDA fixed stuff, if you like. There are elements there which are to do with template IDs, and there are fixed attributes like class code and so on and so forth. And all in all, it's quite verbose, and the amount of actual variable information inside there is quite small. There's really 2 things. There's the ID of the owning organization, which is here, it's RYX, and the name of it. So that's the full CDA, what it looks like. The corresponding piece of Green CDA looks like just what we got at the bottom. You have different tag names if you want, and there, whoops, I'll have to go back again. I've accidentally skipped forward. You can have different tags. You can have meaningful business names for the tag names, and we've called this one document owner. And so the Green CDA has just got the meat, the variable information that you want to convey, and all the fixed stuff that CDA normally has is not there, but that gets restored by the transforms. So that's what Green CDA is. It's a much simpler XML, and I'll show you some full document examples in a minute, which you can transform up and down reliably to full CDA. So how to use it, as that's shown in this diagram here. If you've got a sending application, which we've called A in this diagram, what you've got to do is to build an interface of application A to the Green CDA, and then you apply the transforms, which are supplied and reliable automatically created transforms, to create full CDA. And you can send the full CDA to over the wire. That's what goes over the wire. And at the receiver end, you can similarly, if you want, apply the full to simple transform. So you build your application B to receive the Green CDA only. But there are people out there that are not using Green CDA, of course, and so they can receive the full CDA that you sent out anyway. So the blue boxes, the reliable transforms, are supplied, and they exist as part of Green CDA. I should say, though, they may need to be extended because there may not yet be coverage of the templates you want. And in this case, if there's not yet coverage of the templates you want to use, then either you can use a set of open source tools to create your own Green CDAs, or you can have it supplied commercially for you. In terms of deploying the transforms, these blue boxes, you can either deploy them as a Java runtime engine, which is open source, again, part of the same open source tool set, or you can deploy them as XSLT, which obviously will run in many different places on an integration engine or in your application or wherever it may be. That is licensed, and there's an annual license for that. So the whole purpose of this is that you only need to interface your applications to Green CDA, and that is a very simple vanilla XML interfacing job, which you can use any of a whole range of XML tools to do. Okay, so that is enough on how to use it. Next topic, next 5 minutes, is a brief overview of the history of Green CDA. And this overview is a kind of sandwich, if you like, with something going on in the UK at the top and at the bottom, and some international, US mainly, activity in the middle. So what happened was, about 6 years ago, there were some experiments in the UK about what was called at the time a simplified information ITS for implementation technology for V3 and CDA. And what we managed to show then was you can automatically have a simplified XML and automatically create transforms in both directions. Those experiments were done in the UK and were not particularly taken up by HL7 International, so that's kind of where it rested. And then in 2010, the name Green CDA was invented. I think it's a bit of a silly name, actually, but anyway, a technique was proposed by the Structured Documents Work Group of HL7 International, and it was published as a kind of paper, here's a way of doing CDA. Now, there were various limitations to what was done then. Firstly, the transforms only go in one direction, from the green to the full direction. But the main limitation, in my mind, was that the transforms had to be either written by hand or using low-level mapping tools. By low-level mapping tools, I mean things like Altova MapForce. And so, historically, the transforms were actually rather unreliable, and that was a real problem. So Structured Documents published the method, and there was a lot of publicity at the time, actually, and I think a lot of that was to do with political issues in the United States, that they were deciding what to use for meaningful use, the big government program, and there was a kind of competition between a CDA dialect, CCD, and another non-HL7 thing called CCR, which was actually a lot simpler. So HL7 needed something to say, well, CDA is not that complicated. You can use Green CDA. So there's a lot of PR about it, but I think if you look on the HL7 wiki now to see what's actually going on internationally in the States, I don't see much activity because the threat of CCR in meaningful use has been dealt with. The government chose CDA over CCR, and so the caravan's moved on somewhat in the States. However, back to the UK, we have been developing Green CDAs for the ITK CDAs, and the difference there is that the transforms are automatically generated and automatically tested and are 100% reliable. And they are available now. So that's a brief history of Green CDA. It's a kind of brand name that was invented by the Structured Documents Work Group and has been taken up here. So that's a brief history. What's the next topic? The next topic is the example Green CDA, example ITK Green CDA. The example I'm showing you here is the PHMR, which is the Personal Health Monitoring Report. That, as you're probably aware, is for telehealth devices, particularly in the home, where they're monitoring things like blood glucose, blood pressure, whatever, and there's a monitoring system which watches these things, and if they go outside ranges, alerts the doctors and so on and so forth. So the DHID have done work on this and published the CDA definition in the summer of last year. There was a Green CDA version developed shortly afterwards, and that Green CDA is now in use in one of the Information Sharing Challenge Fund projects. Now, in the full PHMR message, there are probably about 60 different templates for lots of different things that can be monitored, and they're not all yet covered in the Green CDA. What's covered in the Green CDA is, firstly, the header templates, all the things like patient, author, custodian, and so on and so forth. I can't get my cursor to show here. Device definitions, that's definitions of the monitoring devices, and a few kinds of measurements. We've got blood pressure series, blood glucose series, oxygen saturation, and pulse rate. And the threshold and target values, those are separate templates. All those templates are covered at the moment. If you need other templates, they can be quite easily generated. In fact, I generated a new one last night. And the point about these is we do, as we're generating the Green CDAs, we generate the transforms and full round trips, tests, and so on and so forth. So there are two things I'm going to show you in the next couple of minutes. Firstly, that the full round trip is accurate, and secondly, that the full CDA you get out of the transforms passes the ITK checker. So if I just go on to the next slide briefly, this is the situation we've got. We've got a Green CDA on the left and two transforms, green to full and full to green, in the middle, which are automatically generated. So there are two things you have to test. Firstly is if you go from Green CDA to full CDA, the full CDA is a standard full CDA and passes accreditation and so on and so forth. And the second thing you need to be confident of is that if you do a round trip, green to full to green, that you get back exactly what you started with. Now, both of those are quite easily tested in the toolkit that creates the Green CDAs, but I'll just show you, firstly, the ITK conformance of the full CDA. So if I go out of this slideshow, where's end show, and I now instead contract that, and I've just got to hide a load of stuff on the desktop, sorry. What I find eventually is the CDA instance checker that's issued by DHID and used for ITK. This is the folder, top folder you'll see in the instance checker. What you have to do in the instance checker, once you've configured it, is in the input folders, which I'm just going to, input payload, you put the CDA you're going to test. Now this AB_XSL is a CDA PHMR that's been generated from the Green CDA by applying the transforms. And I'll just very briefly show you it in a browser, just to give you a flash of it to show this is a standard CDA, and there you can see record target, the standard CDA header, and so on and so forth. If you scroll on down it, you see loads and loads of stuff. So that is a CDA that we've put in the input folder, and if we just run the checker now, this will take about a minute to run. What I should say during that minute is we've run these instances both against the CDA instance checker in the ITK and the toolkit workbench, which is used for actual accreditation, and they give similar results. My impression is that the instance checker is rather more thorough and rigorous. Anyway, that's the result of the instance checker, and now you can see why it's called Green CDA is when you put it through the instance checker, it gives all green results. So that passed the validation. Normally, if you hadn't passed the validation, you see a whole load of red and amber here. And there's two kinds of validation report. It's showing me the templated one. You can also see the on-the-wire validation report. That, too, is all green. So that's the first check you need to make, is that actually the full CDAs you generate are going to pass ITK validation. And the second check that it's nice to have is that you can do a full round trip using the transforms. And for that, I will show you, and to give you a flavor of what the XML looks like in full, I'll show you the open source toolkit, which is used to actually develop these Green CDAs and transforms and to test them. Now, what I'm showing you here is the test bench that we use to test the transforms as we make them. And the focus here is on the right-hand side of the screen here. And there's a notation we use for the CDAs here. The notation A means the Green CDA. And AB, B is the full CDA language. So AB is the full CDA you get by transforming green to full. And ABA is the Green CDA you get back again by going green to full to green. And these figures 100 here just show that 100% of the information that you started with goes through the transforms. And I'll just very briefly show you the XML of the full PHMR. And so A is the starting point, the Green CDA. And I'll expand that up to full screen to show you. And we can just very briefly go through what this looks like. We have the header stuff at the top. And here we have the patient. And you can see all the obvious things you need to know about a patient. ID, that's NHS number and any other local ID. There's an address, there's a telecom, there's a name, and so on. Then you go to author. For PHMR, there's an authoring device, which is owned by an organization. So there's the name of the device and so on and so forth. Document owner, that's the custodian. And service event and encounter. So those are all the obligatory sections of the CDA header or the non-coded CDA in the green form. And then we go down to the body of the Green CDA. And what you see here, I'll take oxygen saturation series. Now that's to do with COPD. The whole of the series is this stuff between here and here. So to do with the series of measurements, you have the start time, the device, the threshold, the location, and so on. Now, the individual measurements come down to this piece of XML here. That's one measurement. It's one oxygen saturation. You can see it's got a date, it's got an ID, it's got units, and it's got a value. So that is the Green CDA, what it looks like. I won't go through the other sections. When that's transformed to full CDA, what it looks like is here, and it's about 5 times bigger. And again, I'll just pick out, here is the patient. That's the record target part of the CDA. And so there's the patient. It's rather larger than the green version, not hugely larger. And I won't go through the other header section, but just to show you briefly in the body of the CDA, if I can find the right place. So we haven't got to, here's where the body starts with components, structured body, components, section, etc., etc. Entry, we've got, here's the oxygen saturation series starting here. If you go down further, you've got the locations and so on and so forth. And the actual oxygen saturation level, one measurement, is this stuff that I'm picking out here. And so that is one oxygen saturation measurement from the device, and you can see the actual value, 94 down here in the unit SpO2 and so on. That is what was just one line in the green XML. So that's a comparison of green and full XML. As I say, in this particular case, the full CDA is turning out about 5 times larger than the green CDA. Finally, I'll just very briefly show you the result of a round trip. This ABA.xml is a result on the toolkit of starting from green, going to full with the transforms, coming back to green again. And all I'll say is that that is identical with the starting point. We won't go through and sort of prove that in detail, but the round trip test basically works. So that is the brief demonstration of what Green CDA looks like for the PHMR and how the translations work. I think what we come to now is first question time. So if you'd like to sort of demute and see if there are any questions at this stage, otherwise we can bash on.
What I will do is, there are two options here. I can unmute all of us, or if anyone can raise hand, I will unmute him or her. So what I will do, to start with, I will unmute all. Hi. Any questions, please?
Robert, this is Rahul. Hi. I have a very basic question. So the CDA, is that the full CDA, is that automatically generated by default? And if yes, then who uses the Green CDA and what is its main advantage? Does that lighten the workload at input stage, or does it lighten the workload at transportation stage? So
it's not about lightening the workload at transportation stage. The Green CDA definition is an XML schema that says, here's this structure. The Green CDA instance is a piece of XML that is much simpler than a full CDA. And the whole purpose is that in order to take an application like a record or whatever application it may be and interface it to full CDA, all you have to do is interface it to Green CDA, and then there are supplied transforms which can standard way to the full CDA so that other people using full CDA can talk to you, read and write, basically. So it's a way of getting accredited full CDAs that can play F or any other project. But it's an easy way because the XML is much simpler than full CDA, and there's a big learning curve about full CDA that you avoid.
So it's essentially for people who are just starting off on using CDA.
Well, it's for any developer, really. Anybody that has to develop CDA interfaces. Yeah, and especially those that are starting and want to avoid a long learning curve. Maybe they're in a hurry because they've got till March 1st to deliver.
All right, okay, thank you.
I would ask a question. Hi, my name's Alan Pinder. I guess I get the idea of having a simplified XML to make uptake and development of CDA easier. My question would be about if one goes the route of using Green CDA, what kind of guarantees have you got that there'll be future maintainability, etc.? I'm looking at other simple XML structures, also like Fire and so on, as well as simplified versions of CDA.
Yeah. Well, the one guarantee is that there's an open source toolkit which you can download and start using, so you can use that to maintain your own Green CDA if you want. And so you can support it indefinitely yourself. The other thing is that you know, there is a company which supports it and can extend it and enhance it as you need, basically.
Thank you.
mean, the other thing to say is if there's enough take-up, there will be a community who, some of whom are using the extended and so on, and it could become just an open source community. We time for any more questions or any more questions at this stage, or should we bash on?
Anyone? I think we'll go back to the presentation, and there is one more slide in which we can ask the questions. Again, I will unmute all except Robert, so that we can go back to the presentation.
Okay. Well, we're a bit behind schedule, but well. So I was asked to give some comparison of Green CDA and other implementation techniques, and that comparison is in this slide here. I'm aware of 4 main ways of implementing CDA. Model-based, example-based, Green CDA, and the CDA API. I'll just briefly describe these. Model-based is, if you like, the high road to implementing HL7. HL7 is a model-based set of standards to do with a reference information model which can be serialized in XML or in other forms. And so what you do to implement in a model-based approach is you actually have software which builds instances of the reference model, and you learn all about the HL7 reference information model. You build software which builds instances of it in main memory, and then you serialize that as XML. And that is the way that's recommended by various people. It's associated with the so-called RIMBAR working group, RIM-based application architecture. And it's very solid, but there's a big learning curve, a lot of work to do it. Example-based development of CDA, I think that is what most people are doing and what has been demonstrated in previous versions of this CDA forum. And what that is, you're shown an example of the CDA and said, there's that piece of XML. Come up with a piece of software that can output that XML, and by the way, give yourself flexibility to change the pieces you want to change, like the patient name or the measurement values and so on and so forth. So that relies on having examples of the XML and examples of the particular templates that you want to use. And as I say, that's the one which I expect most people are using and which has been demonstrated in these previous forums. Green CDA is what we're talking about today, so it needs no more introduction. Now, CDA API is a set of software in something like C# or Java, which gives you an API where you can set and get things like patient name or whatever it may be, and then the API software will generate for you the CDA XML. Now, the main dimension on which I think you compare these is technical simplicity, the opposite of technical complexity, and there is no doubt that model-based is the most complex and has the biggest learning curve. Example-based is a lot simpler, but still CDAs are big things and there's a lot of fixed stuff in them that you have to learn something about. Green CDA is like example-based, except the XML example you have to fill is much, much simpler. And there's really, anybody with XML skills can do that. And the CDA API, similarly, scores on the simplicity front, that you just learn this rather simple API to set and get the various values that you want to put in the CDA, and that's it. So on the top line, technical simplicity, model-based is the poorest, Green CDA and CDA API, I think, are the best. But there are other dimensions of comparison. For instance, coverage of the different templates. If you're taking a model-based approach, then you can easily extend to accommodate any new template that people come up with. So you're not limited by anybody else there. If you're going example-based, you need examples of a new template in use. Similarly, if you're going Green CDA, you need a Green CDA for that template. And if you're going in CDA API, you want the guy that built the API to have covered your template. And in practice, the coverage of CDA API templates is rather poorer than the others at the moment. So that's what the star rating on the second row is about. Now, extensibility within templates, that's worth talking about, because within any template, you can use the HL7 data types, which are highly flexible things and can be used to hold a whole load of information. And generally, most people don't do that most of the time, but there is extensibility. For instance, on the patient address, just to use a very obvious example, you can have obvious things like postcode, street name, city, etc., etc. Everybody wants those, but what you might want is a date range over which that address is valid, and 2 or 3 addresses with different date ranges. Now, most examples that you see of CDA don't show that, but if you wanted to, certainly the HL7 data types allow you to put a date range on addresses. If you had the model-based approach, you could do that directly yourself. On the example-based or the Green CDA approach, that extension has to be built into the examples or built into the Green CDA, so it's less extensible. So the other approaches are less extensible. But what I should say about extending within templates, if you want to extend and use complicated structures within templates, then you better make sure that the recipient can read them as well. There's no use in transmitting complex stuff if nobody can read it. Deployment flexibility is worth talking about. If you're using a model-based approach, you've probably done that in Java, for instance, and you need a platform that will run Java to actually do that work. Similarly, example-based, you'll have developed in one technology, and your platform will need to support that technology. Green CDA scores a little over the others in that it can be deployed either as Java or as an XSLT. And obviously, XSLT is an extremely flexible deployment method that will run more or less anywhere. So there's a bit of an advantage there. Dependence on others, people have touched on that in the questions already, that, you know, really, I don't think you get 3 stars for anybody in this respect. I think the stars I've put down here are somewhat arbitrary. But and finally, use as a CDA receiver. I've put some star ratings in there. I can come on to those in question time if you like. But in the interest of catching up on time, I think we'll move on from that. That's just a very rough buyer's guide. But if you are running an ICSF project and you want to ask your supplier which route is he using to implementation and what does he think about these star ratings and so on, I'd be very interested in the results. Okay, so that is the rough comparison of Green CDA versus other implementation techniques. I personally think the headline is that Green CDA is very rapid if the Green CDA exists already, and it avoids a very big learning curve, and so it has a lot of advantages, especially if you're starting or in a hurry. So now on to current status. What Green CDAs are available within the ITK? There are currently green versions of the following CDAs. Firstly, the non-coded document, which, as you know, is the header with no content that you put all sorts of PDFs or whatever content you like in. Secondly, the discharge summary, discharge message. Some of the templates, certainly not all the templates there, are covered. Section 2 and Section 5 discharge is a fairly simple message set, which is not actually CDA, it's actually V3, and it's to do with health and social care integration, where the acute trust needs to inform social care that somebody's ready for discharge, are they ready to take him, and so on. There are green CDAs for that. Another social care integration set is the CAF, Care Assessment Framework messages, and finally the PHMR, the Personal Health Monitoring Record. So those exist, and they can pass the ITK checker and the TKW right now. They may not fully meet your requirements, in which case you may need extra templates or extensions to templates. Those can be easily added, either using the open source toolkit yourself or commercially supplied. And as I say, if you want them commercially, want the XSLT form of the transforms, that too is licensed commercially. So that's a current availability. The next slide shows the status in the Information Sharing Challenge Fund. There are, in fact, 3 projects in the Challenge Fund which are using Green CDA at the moment. I'll just briefly go through them. Worcestershire are doing a health and social care integration work, and this is mainly about sharing demographic data between health and social care and also sharing CPA assessments. What they're using for that is a CDA non-coded document containing an embedded PDF document, probably. South Devon Healthcare, this is about use of discharge letters, particularly for out-of-hours service, where the out-of-hours service needs to see a recent discharge message. And the interesting route there is those discharge letters are being put in an XDS repository, which is an IHE standard. So that's one of the ITK projects that's also using XDS. Again, they're using the non-coded document, which will contain embedded in it the discharge letter. And last of the three is Central London Community Healthcare. The bit that's using CDA that I'm aware of is about telehealth monitoring and alerts for COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. It used to be bronchitis, I think, in the old days. And that's monitoring of oxygen saturation levels and pulse rates. And there we're using that PHMR that I've showed you. So that's the current status of Green CDA and ISCF. I think it could be used in other projects. It's certainly not too late to, if you're worried about timescales for delivering an ISCF project, it's certainly not too late to look at Green CDA either as an insurance policy in case your main delivery route runs into problems, or as the main delivery route itself. As I say, there's a lot of Green CDAs there which already pass CDA accreditation and can be picked up. So that, I think, is the end of the second half, and we go on to any further questions.
Hi, everyone. This is the opportunity to ask the questions. Now, again, I said that there are two options. Either you can raise the hand, which you can, if you open your participants list, you will find that there is an option to raise hand, and I can see who is raising hand, or if I cannot see in next few seconds any raise hand, I will unmute all. Hi, Steve. I can see you have raised the hand.
Yep. Hi, Steve Carey here, Health Information Systems. Green CDA seems really helpful, but is it true to say it's happening outside of the CFH tent to some degree, or is it a kind of internal plank of the ITK initiative and so forth?
It's not an internal plank of the ITK initiative. In fact, for a previous release of ITK, they did, CFH themselves did develop a Green CDA for the non-coded document, and you'd find that in previous releases, but that's not supported by them now. So it is developing outside, and that's a matter of a commercial organization, open mapping software, and an open, to the extent that it gets picked up open source, that there can be open source outside development of it, but it's not within the tent at the moment.
Thank you. So just as a follow-on, so where do we pick up Green CDA at the moment?
Well, there's a company called Open Mapping Software, and their website is a starting point. Ultimately, I'll have to send it you what the current versions are.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone who wants to ask the question can raise the hand. You have to open the participants window in order to raise the hand. I can see Alan. Go ahead, Alan, please.
Hi. I think I'm still interested in an overlap here I see between this and the FHIR fire initiative in HL7.
I can talk a bit about that if you like. I mean, the fire initiative, like Green CDA, is a lot simpler XML that aims to express the same information. And the other commonality is that fire takes this 80% rule that unless 80% of the people in the room want a requirement, it doesn't go into the core fire. Now, the difference between them is that if you do the Green CDA route, you automatically get reliable transforms out of the box. Whereas if you take the fire route, the development of transforms between interoperability between fire and CDA, those transforms in both directions are, in my opinion, more complex to develop. And I don't think you'll see people offering automatic fire to CDA reliable transforms. So that job of fire to CDA transforms is a job that I think remains to be done, really, and the fire community is only just beginning to tackle it. I've been in correspondence with Lloyd Mackenzie about this, and you know.
I was in a couple of recent FIRE webinars, and they were describing how it was very much their intent to get automatic transformations to XSLT.
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear the end of that.
They were very much, in both cases, the participants were very keen to get to automatic XSLT transformations from FIRE to HL7, and they believed it wasn't that challenging. That was the gist of it.
Believe it was or wasn't that challenging?
It wasn't. So clearly you've got a lot of experience, which would say otherwise. But I'm very interested. Very interested to see the simple schemas, because obviously there'll be some limits as to how much simplicity you can get without losing the need to communicate in HL7.
Well, just to answer that, I had the opportunity a few months ago to see a set of manually made FIRE to V3 mappings, and because FIRE is not the advantage of Green CDA is it's kind of tree pruning of the CDA tree, and so the mappings are very simple. FIRE is not a direct pruning of a CDA tree, and so there are complex cross mappings on occasions. And to me, that makes the mapping task more complex in the case of FIRE, and it makes more difficult to get thoroughly reliable transforms.
Yeah, I thought this was an open source initiative, but I'm hearing it as more a commercial initiative.
Sorry, I didn't hear the full question.
I had thought that Green CDA was an open source initiative, but I'm hearing it as more of a commercial initiative.
Well, there are two things. There is HL7 International endorses Green CDA as a technique, and you can go to the HL7 website and look at the wiki and so on and so forth. The actual provision of reliable transforms goes in two routes. You can build reliable transforms yourself using open source tools. If you want XSLT deployments of them, then you have to use commercially licensed tools and transforms.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you, Alan. We have another person who wants to ask the question. Rahil?
Yeah.
Hear me? Yes.
Yes, we can.
All right. So, I wanted to find out, you were talking about the CDA API and the ability to query the CDA. Is that facility also provided by Green CDA, or do you have to transform to the full CDA to be able to query parts that you want?
The answer to that question is in the additional topics which come later, but I'll just briefly sketch it. When you develop a Green CDA using these tools, which are open source, then one of the things you get is a class model. The tools are based on EMF Eclipse EMF, and you get an Eclipse class model, a UML class model, from which you can generate Java code. So you can actually take this Green CDA route towards a Java CDA API.
Right, so sorry, just to understand, so you can have an API for Green CDA, is that what you meant? And
then that's a Java API which has getters and setters for the obvious properties you want, and that Java API can generate either Green CDA or full CDA as an output.
Sorry, Robert, so you use the general Java APIs to query over the Green CDA. There's no specific Green CDA API where the methods are more catered towards the CDA template. Are we using the normal Java APIs rather than the CDA APIs?
Well, when you go this route, what you get is a set of Java classes which are much simpler than the full HL7 RIM classes you get with a direct CDA API. So you get a simpler API, but at the same time it's capable of reading and writing. You can still send or receive full CDAs over the wire from it because of the form capabilities built in.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Rahil. There are no raised hands now. I'm assuming we have no more questions. Just to let all know that we can also send the offline questions regarding the Green CDA to CFH interoperability team mailbox, as well as the speaker today has provided the mail on the presentation as well. Do you want to move forward now with the next slide, Robert?
Okay, I'll do that. Just to, briefly touch on a few additional topics. And the first one is rendered text in CDA, which, as you probably know, is quite a difficult area and is not often touched on. The point about CDA is it contains both, in the body of CDA, you can have both rendered text, like narrative descriptions by the doctor of what the problem is and so on and so forth, and coded entries. But if you've got both, they should be mutually consistent with each other. And actually making sure that they're mutually consistent is a difficult job, because obviously free text can refer to information in structured fields in ways that it's very difficult to control. So if you have a requirement for rendered text, my advice is first investigate that requirement very carefully and find out what the clinicians really need. As far as CDA header data is concerned, it's not a problem because there's no narrative text in the header, and the ITK people have supplied transforms which give you quite nice HTML and render it quite nicely. And then within the body of the CDA, I think there are broadly two kinds of text. There is freestanding free text, which is not directly related to coded entries, and that's not problematic. What is more problematic is where the text consists, say, of a table of data that should be consistent with the coded entries. All I would say about this is that what you need to do there to make sure the two are consistent, I would say, is to have an XSLT transform which automatically generates an HTML table from the coded data. And that is a fairly easy thing to do in the context of Green CDA because the coded data is very simple. We saw the example of the PHMR where one oxygen saturation is one XML element. And so making a transform from that to a small table is not a big deal. So that's very briefly a few words about rendered text. Next topic is mapping and transforming CDA to other XMLs, version 2 or whatever it may be. The only point here is that the open source toolkit, which is used to create Green CDAs, is a more general mapping and transformation toolkit. And once you've generated a Green CDA, you can you can interface that to some application, not simply by outputting that XML and transforming it. You can also do direct mappings to that application, or you can do V2 to CDA mappings and so on. And those mappings are, because Green CDA is much simpler than full CDA, those mappings are a lot simpler to do, and you get transforms in both directions. And you can also, from the mappings, get direct transforms, for instance, from V2 to full CDA. So that is a further possibility where you can take it further using the same toolkit that is used to create Green CDAs. The third topic is what Rahel asked about a minute ago. As a side effect of creating a Green CDA, you create a class model in Eclipse EMF, Eclipse Modeling Facility. And if you're familiar with Eclipse, you can easily, using standard Eclipse facilities, generate Java code from that. And the generated Java code has getters and setters for all the fields you need. And that generated Java code is a CDA API, which you can use to read and write either Green CDA or full CDA. And the final brief topic I have under this is there is associated with the Green CDA creation, there's a CDA editor and viewer. If you think about Green CDA, what it's got in it is precisely those fields which are variable and which a clinician might want to edit. And so it's a good starting point for a clinician-oriented editor for the information CDA. And what has been built is an editor that can be automatically generated from the Green CDA definition. It's a web-based editor which starts off with a very noddy pedestrian user interface, but which can be configured further to make it look nicer and make certain fields read-only or whatever it may, add validation and so on and so forth. So there is a framework here for building interactive web-based editors for clinicians' use, which can read or write, editors or viewers, which can read or write full CDA. And that's another of the additional possibilities which resides in the toolkit, which is used to create Green CDAs. So that was just a very quick overview, a helicopter view of those 4 additional topics. I don't know if anybody wants to ask further questions about them or whatever. Otherwise, that's the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you all the participants. And just to let you know that the presentation which Robert has provided us today will be available on NHS ITK network under CDA Implementation Forum. The recording of this Webex will also be available at the same location in a day or two. Thank you very much for attending this Webex. Hope it's useful for all of us. Thank you. Bye.
Are we able to ask questions now?